So, um, sorry to brag. This probably is a strange forum to hear that sentence. But I am really, really good at paying attention. My name is Ellie Barrett, and I'm a senior user experience designer at Yo-Yo Design, based in Kent, where we're a digital agency. So I spend lots of my time in this role thinking about flow and thinking about friction. And I also have ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's a reframe that I find really important when I talk about ADHD. For me, it isn't actually, it doesn't feel like a deficit of attention. It's really a little bit more like having way too much attention to allocate and very little control over where it actually goes. So my brain doesn't necessarily under attend. It attends to everything all at once, and then something else and something else and something else and something I remembered from 3 days ago. And for me, it's this constant negotiation. So, in fact, just thinking about who we are and where we are, if you or someone you know well has been diagnosed with ADHD, they may be familiar with a kind of anecdote that gets used in that conversation where they explain that your brain works kind of like a car with the engine of a Ferrari, but the brakes of a Ford Fiesta. I try to take what resonates and only think about the Ferrari part, but I find that that's a really helpful way of looking at it. In another life, I also used to be a computer science teacher, and this was also really helpful when I thought about my students that had additional cognitive challenges too, because it meant that I didn't necessarily underestimate them. So I'm not sharing any of this stuff for sympathy, because actually, despite its quirks, I'm increasingly glad to have the brain that I do the older I get. I'm talking about all of this because I think it changes what I notice when it comes to design, and because it puts me in an interesting position as someone who has worked through lots of systems that weren't designed for me or my brain. I'm now in a position to influence decisions to improve that situation. So today I'm going to be talking about designing for cognition, obviously not as a niche accessibility topic, and I hope that in this kind of arena, that's not how it's considered. But hopefully we can get into some practical bits and pieces that are useful. So let's talk about scale. According to the CDC, around 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent, which is 1 in 5 people. I love this statistic for family meals. If you want to just really sort of spice things up, you can bring it up around the dinner table. But it's really important to think about, because I've had so many conversations where I think, okay, we need more progressive disclosure on this user journey, or this, you've taken away lots of clutter, but now actually you're making me remember loads of things. And people sort of go, oh, well, for MVP, for phase one, for in this sprint, we're not going to be thinking about those edge cases. But these aren't edge cases. This is 20% of all people. And that's, realistically, that's only who we know about. I can talk to my own experience of ADHD, but neurodivergence doesn't just mean ADHD. It means, autism. It can mean dyscalculia, dyslexia, a combination of all those things. And as is not discussed enough, a combination of neurodivergence and other disabilities, because we don't all just get one. But it's just really, really important that we're not thinking about these people as edge cases anymore. So the experience of most of these people when they try to access the web is that it's not designed for them. So I've mentioned cluttered layouts, but think about inconsistent navigation. People love to spice up navigation and kind of try and reinvent the wheel, but it slows everyone down. It's a bit of a pain, in my opinion. Walls of text. Genuinely, people don't necessarily believe me when I explain that that really is inaccessible. I could sit and force myself to read all of it. I'm not having any fun. I associate your brand with very bad feelings, but I'm not remembering any of that information. And you really want me to remember some of that information. It's no use to me. If you send me 5 different notifications, where only one would do, again, it's just building up a picture of friction for me. So I've kind of touched on this already, but more perversely, designs that completely lack necessary information too are a massive issue. So designs that don't make it clear where I've come from or where I am are a really big issue. And I'm seeing more and more and more of that, because people go, well, I've removed clutter. But minimalism to the point of abstraction is just as useless. It's actually, I find, worse because people get away with it too much, because something might look good on the surface, right? And also, we all know that we all have the WCAG guidelines now, and we all know about those. And so the whole issue is fixed, right? No, it obviously isn't. That's another really big issue. And I think particularly when it comes to cognitive accessibility and design, there's been some really fantastic points already this morning, but I know that others have already touched on the fact that these things are lost so early on in the process in design because people think I'm gonna come back and address it later, and over reliance on WCAG guidelines I think really compacts that problem because you think we're just going to run it through an AI check later on, it's going to be fine. And many new developers and designers are led to believe that screen reader compatibility is the same thing as global accessibility, and it is not. So now I'm done listing those gripes. I feel better. You can tell that I've got some what's the word? Chips on my shoulder about these issues. So I know that some of us are in rooms where it's the right thing to do doesn't actually always win this argument. So let's talk business. A 2024 Disability Equality Index report by Accenture found that companies leading in disability inclusion generate 1.6 times more revenue and 2.6 times more net income than their peers, which is obviously significantly better, not just a little bit better. It's not lost on me when I talk about things like this that if that company had more money in the first place, they were more likely to invest in these things. And that's a bit chicken and egg. But finding and readying stats like this for those conversations can be really, really helpful. When you design for people at the edges of typical experience, you make things better for everyone. And I imagine that the curb cut effect isn't necessarily new to everyone here. So apologies if I'm telling anyone, to suck eggs, but it's a really helpful way to talk about the good that thinking about accessibility can do for everyone. So curbs that we walk along on the side of the road, or that we wheel along on the side of the road, and we move along and we travel along. There's lots of dips and cuts in those curbs, so that people who are using wheelchairs can get off of that curb nice and easily, right, and safely. But as someone who regularly trundles along with a buggy packed with 9 bags and 10 coats and all the rest, it's really helpful for everyone. If I'm looking over the top of the box, then I can't see the edge of the curb, and it's helpful for everyone. It's the same principle when it comes to designing with cognition in mind. I kind of just want to talk about really quickly this example of talking up to the issue of minimalism to the point of abstraction, because I think this is where I tend to see issues when it comes to stakeholders. And sort of that argument now is, well, we've made it really minimal, we've decluttered it, therefore it's cognitively accessible. In this example, loads and loads of cars have now got touchscreens, and that feels really minimal and that feels like much easier, but it's not necessarily, because actually you lose that muscle memory to just click a button, and it becomes a little bit more dangerous because we have to use our attention, of which I'm already having to work quite hard to control while I'm driving, right? Don't tell anyone I said that. I'm having to look down at this touchscreen and go, oh, where's that? Where's this? I can't use my sense of touch to just go, here's the button I need to turn on my AC. So I really like having these little examples to just help grease the wheels in those conversations with stakeholders. So I thought I'd just talk about this for a moment. So back to cognition and cognitive challenges for users. A few years back, if I asked you, the royal you, to think about someone with cognitive challenges, you might have pictured a badly behaved little boy. In reality, what designing for cognitive accessibility can look like is advocating for someone who finds it more challenging to pass loads of written information at once, or someone who's under time pressure to produce a response to a terror threat. So those two things seem like an unfair conflation. This piece of work was one that we did where we were looking at exactly that. So someone who's very quickly trying to put together a response that needs to be aware of global legislation when it comes to terror threats and violent extremism. That's a lot of pressure. And when we're under pressure, one of the first things to struggle more is that prefrontal cortex and everything we're doing in the front of our brain. cognition, remembering things, doing things quickly, detail-oriented tasks. So as well as that person with ADHD doing a regular everyday task, think about people under stress, right? So in this example, this is a website that Yo-Yo worked on recently for Fight for Sight. So this was like a huge merger for two websites and two charities. That's already super challenging, right? But this charity works predominantly with people with who are partially sighted or who are blind or who are the supportive communities around people with those disabilities. And one of their kind of use cases was people who've just been diagnosed and just found out that, for example, they themselves are dealing with a condition that's going to eventually lead to total sight loss. The emotional stress that person is under is going to impact the way that they think, remember, the way that they move through tasks, and it's going to mean that they have stronger cognitive challenges. On top of the fact that they also may need, a design that works well for them from a visual perspective or with assistive technologies. So thinking about these things in combination is also really important, and I think often lost too. So cognitive accessibility isn't a feature that we just bolt on at the end. It needs to be a quality standard that raises the floor for everyone. And when we do design for people who have cognitive challenges all of the time, then you're going to make things better for people who have situational cognitive challenges. So let's talk about what this looks like in a practical sense. I don't want to be giving anyone a big design lesson today, but I'm just going to hit on these top things that kind of feel really important. And I've set this out so that it can be, so you guys can just grab a screen grab if you wanted to. So number one, reduce the cognitive load. This is huge. Every time a user has to hold information in their head, make a decision or figure out what's happening, you are spending their cognitive budget. And some people's budgets are smaller or they work differently than yours. Use white space, be ruthless about clutter, and stop asking for information that you don't need. That's looking at you, donation forms on charity websites. Number two, be consistent. Predictability is a gift. If your navigation moves around, if your buttons look different on every page, if the same action has 3 different labels depending on its context, you are asking users to keep relearning how to do something. And that might be fine for Peter, but it's not fine for Paul. Make it feel intuitive for someone with a cognitive disability. And the likelihood is that you just made it seamless for someone without that cognitive disability. It is win-win. So be consistent. Give people control. This is huge, and this is something that developers and designers alike tend to learn in their first lectures in their first year of uni and go, of course that makes sense. And then a few years on, completely forget. Okay, so reduce motion by default, offer a way to turn it off, let users control their text size without breaking the layout. Don't just expect, well, you'll have extensions for that. You'll know how to do that. This person might be brand new to dealing with these challenges, right? Don't assume that they already know how to self-serve. For goodness sake, don't autoplay video or audio. So I now work with people who don't remember MySpace, but think about MySpace. That was super annoying. Don't let those things autoplay. It's really, really important, again, as well, from a business perspective. These things are annoying. They're frustrating and they are annoying. They might, from a design perspective, in one design delivery, make people feel excited then, but to real users trying to do things, you are going to have your brand associated with being really annoying and frustrating. The last two are write like a human. Plain language isn't dumbing things down. It's respecting people's time and people's attention. Use short sentences, use active voice. Don't bury key information in the middle of a paragraph. And in terms of neurodivergence, please be very literal. Say exactly what you mean, and really think about whether or not you're saying exactly what you mean, because it matters. Design for forgiveness. Let people undo things. Confirm with the user before letting them delete things. Let users save progress. If you can auto save things in your design flow, amazing. If your product doesn't accommodate people being able to go back on mistakes that they've made, they'll leave and they won't come back. They're not going to do things twice. And that's actually, people are impatient even if they don't have cognitive challenges. So again, you are designing for everyone when you design for people with additional cognitive challenges. I really like this quote So if disabled people were truly heard, an explosion of knowledge of the human body and psyche would take place. Um, there is a really, really lovely example of this that's already happening. Post pandemic, global pandemic, there's a lot of research now to linking long COVID with some comorbidities around ADHD, and this is and neurodiversity. This is super duper complex, but it means that things are starting to be looked at more holistically, and as part of, people are looked at as a whole system. But the more that you work with and understand disabled folks and their experiences, you will unlock insights before your competitors, and you will be, the people who are at the bleeding edge of finding new design solutions. I think I'm running out of time, so I think I just want to wrap up. So I've made some generalizations here purely for brevity, and not everyone with ADHD thinks the same or has only ADHD. Neurodiversity is a spectrum, and everyone has their own complex profile of strengths and challenges. What that means is the more of us you include in your knowledge, the greater the insight. Please consider your neurodiverse colleagues, friends, family as being expert critics in particular areas of your design, and use them that way. The 1 in 5 of us are neurodiverse, which means there really isn't an excuse. You probably know plenty of us that you can ask, even if there is no project budget. So 2 tiny takeaways. If you're like me and your memory isn't very good and you're only going to remember 2 things, make them be this. Cognitive accessibility is good design, full stop. Designing for diverse minds does not add complexity. It removes it. It helps you make decisions. When you reduce cognitive load and you build predictable systems, you raise the quality for everyone. The accessible version is always the better version. The business case, my second point, is already made for this. You do not need to argue for inclusion only on moral grounds, though obviously those grounds are solid. Be one of those companies that are leading in inclusion and accessible design, and be one of those that is able to then access 20% of users a lot better than your competitors. I hope this was helpful. I obviously can't talk. I could talk about specific design challenges and UI issues and things like that forever, but we don't have that much time. But if anyone has any specific questions, I'm obviously super happy to address them.